Next, you guys, I'm going to go over evaluation arguments. But before I do, let me just clarify one more time that if you are interested in this topic, you have to first create an idea that is specific enough for some kind of action to be committed for it. So if your idea, let's say, it all starts somewhere like banning plastic straws from Starbucks. That was such a specific idea. And then it actually got enough signatures and it passed and it went through. Or even, using plastic bags in grocery markets. You have to have an idea that is small enough that it can actually be accomplished. Please don't create an idea like, let's end world hunger. Okay, good luck with that. You want to create an idea that is relevant in your community, in your city. Make it small enough that it can actually go through and it can actually be delivered. Okay, so um, uh, you'll see once you browse through some of these topics that the more focused the topic is, the better this idea will be and the better the actual petition will be. So again, that is for option number one. Now, I created option number two because I love evaluations. And when an evaluation is good, it can be such a persuasive piece of writing. Now, for possible topics, I gave you guys some ideas. If evaluations are everyday arguments and they're meant to help us, make decisions, there's some arguments that, nowadays are pretty popular, like, should I vaccinate my child? A very controversial topic, has different opinions on both sides. Should I become vegan? My friend says absolutely yes, but at the same time, it's not something that's easy for me. So obviously, you're going to see a lot of arguments on both sides. Am I spending too much time in front of the TV? There's a lot of arguments out there on whether TV is, making us dumber. There's such interesting arguments out there. Now, there's going to be tons of arguments that you disagree with, and that is the focus of this assignment. You want to select a specific argument that you disagree with. So you got to do some research, what's out there. Obviously, there's tons of possible sources you might want to look at. So this argument might appear in a speech. Like, let's say a political figure gave a speech. Maybe it was, I don't know, Joe Biden, and he gave a speech recently in some kind of a political forum, and you would like to really dissect this speech. That's what you can do for this assignment. Maybe it's a lecture that a professor gave. These lectures, a lot of them are on YouTube. A lot of professors share their lectures. Like this, for example, I'm sharing it on YouTube, so it'll be easier to access. You might have attended a live lecture. If you did, you need to have good notes for it. It might be from a podcast. I've recently started listening to Joe Rogan's podcasts, and I'm actually really interested in some of the subjects that he brings up. And of course, there's a lot that I'm like, gosh, I feel so passionately against this because he brings different sides to the issue. And then sometimes those different sides, like whoever the figures are, they sort of go at it. And I think it's so interesting to listen to that. It could be from a person's blog. Please don't let it be some random Joe, It could be this Joe, but not like a random person that's just publishing, rants online. It should be somebody that has at least, acquired some credibility through their experience, through their work. It could be a tweet. I mean, just go ham on our president. He's got tons of tweets that are pretty controversial. And basically, your goal is to evaluate your chosen argument with the intent to disprove it. So I thought I would give you an example of something that I became interested in. Again, I was saying I've started listening to podcasts, and here's one in particular. Joe Rogan interviewed this college professor, Jordan Peterson, who was threatened to be let go of. So he worked at Toronto University. This is in Canada. And he refused to use some of these gender pronouns that became sort of like a law in the school. And this is actually implemented in a lot of schools now too, where these gender pronouns are in effect. So just to give you an example, if a student wants to be called they, then you have to accommodate that that request. So by law, like Jordan Peterson had to follow through with those rules. And this podcast, I mean, it's like 3 hours, but it's worth a listen. It's number 877. If you guys are interested, Joe Rogan Experience, you might want to listen to it. So when I was listening to the podcast, I had no idea who Jordan Peterson was. I realized like, oh, this guy gained some popularity as a result of a lot of this controversy. He basically said, no, I'm not going to use these pronouns. So he was defying the law of the school. It was against school policy. And then he was, under attack as a result. So then I started searching, what Toronto University's policy was. In terms of, what exactly did he break as far as the rules were concerned. And I became interested in writing an evaluation. So, of course, whatever side you decide to take, let's say there's an argument, make sure you have both sides and then choose one that you would like to critique. So in this case, I would choose the University of Toronto's position to critique because I actually think Jordan Peterson has a very good argument. So with that in mind, I chose a very specific argument. I chose to evaluate that argument. So I would have to go and find the argument that the university sent out. So the policy in writing, if you go to the website, you'll actually be able to find it. And then I'm going to critique that argument. And my intention is to disprove the argument. So I think it works best when you choose something that's pretty controversial. And then, of course, you evaluate it with the purpose of going against it. You need to, first of all, context is everything. Just like I gave you a little bit of context, not enough, but just a little, just to give you an overview of the subject matter I was interested in. So you have to start with context. Like, give us the background information. What was the argument involving? Let's say it was a debate. President Trump went at it. He's always going at it with somebody, with a journalist. And this is what the journalist was saying. This is what President Trump tweeted. You want to give the full argument. And then, of course, you want to then choose, certain criteria, like what were some of the holes in this argument? For example, sometimes people, it doesn't matter who they are. They might be political figures. They might be even just like college professors. They express very biased perspectives. There's a lot of biased perspectives that are in a book that I currently teach, and I started to notice them as I was teaching them to students in Rereading America. Some of you were my English 101 students, and you might have had this book. And I realized, I was like, wow, I never realized how many biased perspectives are out there. And as a critical thinking student, I think it is our responsibility, it's really our goal to be able to filter the biased arguments and be able to know, okay, this person has an agenda. And it's nice to know that. It's important to know that. Don't just believe everything at face value. There's tons of articles in that book that I teach that in retrospect, when I go back and I look at them, I'm just like, my God, this is completely one-sided. They did not even acknowledge the opposite side. So I think this argument, I love it so much because it really gives us just enough attention to the counter argument. And that's what we're doing. We're essentially evaluating a counter argument that we just don't agree with, and we're trying to break it down, like what makes this argument illogical? In what way does this argument show bias? How is it showing a biased opinion? Maybe it has a lot of logical fallacies in it. Maybe it does not have enough logos in it. Maybe this argument doesn't have enough ethos. Like, for example, how many experts have you heard that just bust out with all these statistics, but they don't really indicate where these statistics are coming from? So suddenly it's like, oh, 50% of people have stopped drinking coffee. You're like, wow, okay, but based on what study? And they don't identify their sources. A lot of people are upset with President Trump because he does a whole lot of like throwing statistics out there without really giving his sources. So he'll say something like, oh, my sources say this or my sources say that, but that's not a very good way to argue. So it's important to be able to see when an argument has weak ethos or weak logos, or even if it's entirely based on pathos. That's a problem too, because if an argument is only based on pathos, that means it's using a sentimental appeal, which is a logical fallacy. Maybe the argument is too angry, and I'm saying that in a very simple way, like it's just very aggressive and it's not quite working, and you don't find it to be a very persuasive argument. So I thought, maybe finding some of the fallacies in your opponent's argument might be a good way to start. And then, of course, the research element is the same as the first topic, which I will go over in my third video. But what I did want to clarify is if you are interested in evaluating a counter argument, an argument that is opposing what you believe, that's the goal, you have to have a specific argument in mind. You got to start somewhere. Do your research. So if the president tweeted something, you got to find out, okay, what's the origin of the argument? Like, what is he upset about? What is he tweeting about? What did that journalist write that the president is so upset and is saying it's fake news? Instead of immediately taking a side, do your investigation and then break it down. So you got to create some criteria for your investigation, of course, and then ultimately, you're trying to say, well, this argument is not a strong argument, and here are the reasons why. But to do so, you got to have a specific argument in mind. So one thing that I would like to show you guys before I move on to the source requirements is notice how both topics require a very specific argument. For the change.org petition, you got to have a very specific idea in mind that is reasonable enough to be to follow through with. So it's an idea just like banning, plastic straws in restaurants. It's an idea that it's doable. It's something that can be accomplished. It's not so huge that you're asking the impossible of this person who has power. So that's a specific idea. For the second topic, if you're interested in this one instead of the first one, you have to select a very specific argument that was given by a person. So it could be in the form of a multimedia source. It might be in a podcast. It might be in an interview. It might be in a speech or a published article. Anywhere. This argument can exist anywhere online, anywhere in written form, but it has to exist, and you have to refer to it specifically if this is the topic you would like to do. So both topics require very specific focuses, and that's what makes it, I think, most interesting. So watch out for my third video, which will be on the source requirements for these essays.